first graduating class for the Hallows End University was small, roughly 100 individuals who began at the university in that first year. The graduates sat upon the stage. I made it a point to leave one seat empty. Iris McGlennon was the only person who failed to graduate. Her photograph was on her empty chair. When I read the names of the graduates, I could barely get her name out intelligibly. I had to stop and swallow down the emotions clogging my throat before I could continue. Iris's loss was felt deeply by all who knew her. It seemed cruel in the extreme that she would show her aura to Cameron only hours before she was taken from us. I do not believe that I truly understood what it meant to be the delegate until the moment I learned of her death. For Cameron, the only purpose left in his life was to serve the needs of the project until deity called him home to be with Iris again. Gideon Zakarian, Designate's Journal.
Good God!
Mary's grandfather exclaimed as they rounded the shoulder of Mount Estoliana. The massive palace atop Mount Zacharias came into view, cast in sharp relief by the early morning light. The sun now edged above the far ridgeline, its rays catching the Estolian flag as it fluttered from the highest tower. Mary remembered the awe she had felt 10 weeks earlier at that same site. It was one of the most impressive buildings she had ever seen.
If that isn't one of the largest palaces ever built, I'd be shocked,
her grandfather said. He was obsessed with the architectural wonders of the ancient world. He would be excited by many of Estolia's extraordinary edifices. A flood of pleasure warmed her heart. She would be bringing her grandparents their heart's desire, but even beyond that she knew they would enjoy their stay.
It is, in fact, one of the largest,
Leon responded.
But we prefer a low profile, and do not attempt to claim notoriety for our architectural wonders.
It is truly amazing,
her grandfather said.
Will I be allowed to tour the building?
Oh yes, absolutely. The palace, the cathedral, and even the temple if you wish.
Mary squeezed Darin's hand, her heart overflowing with the sweet anticipation of the joy she would soon bring her favorite relatives. For the rest of the journey, her grandfather and Leon discussed the palace and its architecture with engaged enthusiasm. As the carriage began the steep ascent up the palace road, Darin drew her closer, his arm settling around her shoulders. She leaned against him, listening to the beat of his heart. The rhythmic cadence of hooves and crunch of gravel filled the air as she tried to make sense of the shift between them. Her skin felt warm, alive, her thoughts strangely unfocused. These were new sensations, ones she couldn't sort or name. When she'd met him in Barcelona, she'd admired him, been drawn to him, but never imagined he might feel the same. Now, watching the way he carried himself with her grandparents and Leon, she thought, perhaps only imagined, that he was, in his quiet way, proclaiming it. The carriage finally reached the summit of the truncated mountain, where the fingers of stone rose around the palace like a protective hand, as if to keep it safe for millennia to come. In the short time she had been in Estolia, she had come to look forward to this part of the journey. The carriage swept around the wide ornamental pond, where orange and gold koi flashed through the clear water beneath the fountain's spray. They halted beside the twin switchback staircases that rose toward the palace's grand entrance.
I'm more impressed than ever,
her grandfather proclaimed. His eyes shone as he took in the tiers and terraces, the arches and columns, the rising towers that crowned the palace.
It'll be an honor to stay here.
You were a bit short on details, my dear,
her grandmother said.
Our time is our own, but you didn't mention how long you'd like us to stay with you.
Mary answered without thinking.
I'd keep you here with me forever if I could.
Darin squeezed her shoulder and added,
It is our hope that you will consent to remain for a minimum of 3 weeks. There is an important ceremony in 1 week and another the following week. It would be best, we think, for you to remain through both. You are, of course, welcome to stay in Estolia for as long as your granddaughter is here. She will be granted a 5-year visa within the next fortnight, I have been told.
The carriage came to a halt and they climbed out. Leon glanced at the stairway, then turned to her grandparents.
I have learned never to make assumptions,
he said with a smile.
I will not presume you incapable of mounting the staircase. Would you prefer our elevator?
Her grandmother laughed softly.
We both believe staircases are essential to strong cardiovascular health. We'll manage the climb perfectly well.
As they approached the smaller chamber favoured by the royal family, Mary felt her pulse quicken. The next few minutes would be critical. Her grandparents had no idea that Darin was their own flesh and blood, their grandson. She glanced at him and caught his lingering focus on her, unaware of what awaited him. Then she looked to Leon, and in the faint tightening of his expression saw the truth. Darin was every bit as unprepared as her grandparents. When they entered the room, Mary looked from Kedarin to her grandmother and saw how closely the two women resembled each other. Zeke stood with his arm around his wife, waiting to see how events would unfold. Her grandmother stopped short, her gaze fixed on Kedarin.
Earl?
She whispered, barely managing her husband's name. Mary said softly,
I found her, Gran.
The two women crossed the space between them and folded into each other's arms. Her grandfather joined them a heartbeat later, wrapping both women close, his eyes shut tight, a tremor visible in his jaw.
I do not understand.
Darin said.
It was your name.
Mary told him quietly.
It made me wonder if it was just a coincidence. My grandparents' baby was taken from the hospital right after birth. They never found her.
She drew a breath.
They searched for months, for years, trying to find their missing daughter.
Darin looked from her to the tearful reunion and turned ghostly white.
You are saying your grandparents are also my grandparents?
His voice cracked, the colour draining from his face. Leon stepped forward, motioning for Darin and Mary to sit, letting the reunion unfold in its own time. His voice carried a restrained intensity as he said,
When Mary was introduced to Kedarin, she reacted to her name in such a peculiar way that the truth came out almost instantly.
We are cousins?
He sounded disturbed.
No, Darin.
Leon was firm.
After Kedarin went missing, Carol Cicero could not have any further children. After 18 months of looking, they adopted Mary's mother, Molly, when her family were killed in a fire.
Mary watched the colour seep back into Darin's face and wondered why he had reacted so strangely to the idea that they might be related.
I wondered.
Darin said after he absorbed Leon's answer.
Why it was you insisted that I only introduce myself by the name of Darin Zakarian.
Leon smiled.
We wanted to be sure that the surprise was not spoiled. I am sorry you were not informed.
Darin looked at his parents, at the tears on his mother's face, at the joy suffusing the features of the older couple, and shrugged in acceptance.
I think it was the right choice. I might have treated them differently if I knew.
You did an excellent job of diverting their attention from their understandable curiosity,
Leon observed.
They were certain, by the time we got to the palace, that your interest in their granddaughter was the reason they were asked to fly out.
Darin glanced at Mary and smiled at her.
I was not trying to divert their attention. I wanted them to know how utterly fascinating I thought their granddaughter.
Mary blushed at that assertion. She looked at Darin, trying to see what he was saying. The message he was sending her with his eyes was hard to believe.
Now is not the time, Mary,
Darin said quietly.
But later this evening, you and I need to talk.
A few moments later, the older couple took their seats, with Zeke and Kedarin joining them. Leon introduced Callista, and servants moved gracefully through the room with tea.
I never understood why my cousin insisted that I use only my familiar name.
Darin said,
We named him after me, Kedarin Antiochus Zakarian.
Kedarin said, her voice rich with subtle nuances. Her eyes met those of her mother, and the unspoken message between them was profound, even if those watching were not quite privy to its meaning. For Mary, the morning shimmered with wonder as she watched joy transform her grandparents' faces. The only shadow in that golden hour had been Darin's reaction when he first learned of their connection, a look of almost horror crossing his features before relief softened them. Something Leon had said had clearly shifted his understanding. As conversation flowed, stories, laughter, the rediscovery of kin, Darin kept her hand enclosed in his, a quiet promise that his interest in her ran deeper than courtesy.
"We would like to escort you to the suite we have set aside for you,"
Zeke said to her grandparents.
"It is in our personal wing of the palace. We hoped you would prefer that to being in one of the guest wings."
That would be perfect.
Her grandfather said. Mary hugged her grandparents and, for good measure, hugged Kedarin and Zeke. As she embraced Zeke, he whispered in her ear,
"Listen carefully to what Darin has to tell you."
She felt a blush warm her face at his words. She looked at him curiously, catching the sparkle of happiness in his eyes. She nodded, a blush rising to her cheeks. Leon and Cailey stayed nearby, but moved to the far side where, within minutes, Cailey's hands drifted over the piano keys, soft notes filling the space as Leon slipped an arm around her waist. Darin smiled at Mary and squeezed her hand, still clasped in his.
"I am overwhelmed by the happiness you have brought my parents,"
he said quietly.
You looked like it was the worst possible news.
She pointed out. He nodded, a serious expression on his face as he explained,
"Estolia is a small nation, and nearly everyone here is a cousin of some sort. Because of such close family ties, one of the important guidelines we live by is that we must try to avoid marrying cousins who are too closely related. If we have the same grandparents, we would not be able to marry."
He had been declaring his interest in her from the moment they met up again.
Marriage?
She prompted him.
"Marriage."
He was emphatic. His gaze dropped to where her hand rested in his. He drew it to his lips and kissed the back gently.
"I do not wish to live without you, Mary. I have tendered my notice and moved back to Estolia, permanently."
To be with me?
She squeaked. She studied his face, visually tracing each familiar line and catching the subtle echo of her grandparents in his features.
"Yes, Mary, to be with you."
He looked over to where Leon and Cailey sat together before returning his focus to her.
"My family knew of my interest.
His fingers tightened around hers and he inhaled deeply before saying breathlessly,
I plan to marry you the instant I can, the moment I can convince you to say yes."
She felt a reckless need to lock this man to her side.
I did not know, Darin, that it was possible to fall in love twice in one day, but the day I met you and Kamchatka, I felt as if my heart would burst. I knew Cam fell in love with me, and I thought I would have to accept only his love. I never thought you would also return my feelings.
"It was mutual."
He pulled her close and kissed her softly. It was only as his hand on her ribs started to wander that another voice intruded.
"I heard everything went okay."
Mary pulled back and saw that Nico and Kenzie had entered the room and were now sitting in the seats her grandparents had only just vacated. She flushed, remembering that Darin's hand had strayed to the lower curve of her breast just before the couple interrupted them.
"It is a miracle that Mother was reunited with her birth parents."
Darin said,
"I do not think that I have ever seen my mother this happy, except, perhaps, the time when the doctors said that Miracle was going to live."
"Deity brings happiness to those deserving of it,"
Nico stated solemnly.
"Your mother, Darin, deserves the happiness that Mary has brought her. I am sure that her grandparents are also deserving of the joy they've been given on this day."
He looked from Darin to Mary, his voice shifting from soft and sentimental to hard and businesslike.
"It would seem we need to have a discussion."
Mary remembered how passionate their kiss had become before this man and his wife entered the room. She wondered what Nico was going to say to them. Had she broken any taboos?
"Mary,"
Nico addressed her.
"one of the things you will learn during your research is that Estolian men always marry when they are 30. The optimum day to marry is always exactly a week after the 30th birthday."
She felt a flush on her cheeks. Nico had not even been in the room when Darin first brought up marriage. How could he know that Darin had practically proposed just a few minutes ago?
"Darin will be 30 in 1 week,
Nico stated. Darin had that hungry look on his face again.
"I plan on marrying you, Meredith Palmer,"
he said.
"But you may not be alone with Mary until your birthday,"
Nico said.
"Of course. May I begin my elder year once Mary and I are married?"
"I was hoping you would ask to join the others,"
Nico said.
"I do believe that the men who are in their elder year right now are some of the most extraordinary individuals our nation has ever seen." Your voice and personal strength will only add to the synergy we have created.
Mary, we've had your stuff moved to our wing of the palace.
Kenzie said.
I'm hoping you won't mind spending time with me over the next week.
I don't mind.
Mary said, unsure what was happening.
Great.
Kenzie grinned.
You and Darin can go for a dawn ride the day before his birthday. But other than that, I'm afraid we're going to keep your time together pretty limited.